Hey, it's Kyle here, and it's been a while. Sorry for the 2-month hiatus. I've had a lot going on, both with work and the final parts of building mine and my partner's house, which we should get the keys to next week at the time of recording. We're doing something sort of different this time around, kicking off a new series of sorts for the channel where I recreate real space missions. As you may have guessed from the title card, we're tackling the European Space Agency's JUICE mission, the Jupiter Icy Moon Explorer, which, when I started planning this almost 2 months ago, was just about to launch. So this will be the first entry in what I'm dubbing the Real Mission series. Not terribly inventive, I realise, but at least it does what it says on the tin. Now, while Artemis would technically fall into this category, it's a whole other beast in and of its own right. So it'll be staying as its own series, and Artemis 4 will be our next video after this one, before we return to Korea Strategia. So back to the task at hand. We've blitzed through building our JUICE probe, but as ours is visiting Jool, we've renamed it a little to JUICE, just like the Dragon Ball Z character.
Spice Australia, or more specifically, Spice Brisbane. Go Spice Broncos!
This is a very mod-reliant build with almost all the probe parts coming from mods I have installed. For our core, we're using the Probo-Dobodyne CHFR probe core and the CHFR bus from Nertier's Near Future Exploration mod to build out the shape of our probe. It's also where we got 2 of our smaller antennas. We've also got some solar panels from Nertier's Near Future Solar mod, the Oscar D liquid fuel tanks from Restock Plus, and the MRS radial batteries and Sparkler liquid fuel engine from Necrobones' Modular Rocket System mod. We are using the RA2 relay antenna, which will cause us a headache later in the video, with a whole load of science gear attached to help create the look of the JUICE craft. As always, any mods I mention will be linked in the video description, but please let me know if I've missed something. For our launch vehicle, we're building an Ariane 5 ESA rocket, the most commonly used variant of ESA's trusty workhorse. The first stage uses the 2.5 meter Rockomax X200 tanks, lifted by a mainsail engine and flanked by 2 Pollux SRBs, making use of tweak scale for their nose cones. The upper stage uses a smaller X200 tank with a Poodle engine and a 2.5 meter payload fairing to secure our craft to. I've chosen to use the ESA variants of these tanks, and all up we have around 10,000 meters a second of delta V to play with, 2.5k in our probe and 8k in our lifter. So I guess it's time we get it onto the launch pad. Unfortunately, OBS did not record the audio again for some reason, so we'll just have to make up for it with some great synthwave music. Now, while JUICE is a big mission in and of its own right, it's also of note because it's the last big mission for the Ariane 5 rocket before it's replaced. While it might have 1 or 2 more launches planned for communication satellites, it's not quite as exciting as a mission to Jupiter. The Ariane 5 rocket has been ESA's main launch platform since 1998 and has put 111 payloads into orbit. Across all those launches, there's only been 5 incidents, 4 of which were very early in its career. The 5th incident was a partial failure in 2018, but the payload still reached orbit. All up, it's a pretty impressive run, with only 2 real launch failures, both on the first launch after a redesign. The Ariane 5 has launched a few important missions over the years, including the James Webb Space Telescope, the Bepi-Colombo mission to Mercury, which is arriving in December 2025, and the Rosetta probe, which visited Comet 67P, aka Churyumov-Gerasimenko, from 2014 to 2016. The Ariane 6 is expected to take over launch duties in the last quarter of 2023, with a spot booked in 2026 for the Mars Sample Return mission, along with the Plato Space Telescope, which will look for Earth-like exoplanets in habitable zones of other Sun-like stars. But back to the mission, we've dropped our boosters, entered space, circularized our orbit, and separated from the first stage, and now the upper stage is on its way out of Kerbal's sphere of influence via a flyby of the Mun. JUICE is not going to burn like hell up to Jupiter, and is instead going to make a series of gravity assist maneuvers in its 8-year-long journey to the most massive planet in our solar system. This starts with a flyby of the Moon, then Earth, then Venus, and then 2 more passes of Earth to slingshot it out to Jupiter's orbit. There's also a potential flyby of asteroid 223 Rosa in the asteroid belt during the last leg of the journey, but as of recording, it's only been proposed. But fun fact, this is honestly my very first mission to Jool in KSP, and I do mean ever. Truth be told, I'd only managed to land on Juna and Eve once before I started this channel, and that was mostly my own fault because I was obsessed with my mod loadout. Now that the game's stable, I don't have to worry too much about it. So of course this means I am going to make this difficult for myself. We're going to be doing the same flybys as JUICE for our mission to Jool as well. We've headed past the Mun and we'll be swinging past Kerbal again shortly to sling ourselves down into an orbit that sends us to Eve, before boosting back up to Kerbal's orbit for 2 more gravity assists out to Jool. To figure all this out, including the launch window, the deep space maneuvers, and the angle of injection and ejection from each planet, I had to make use of a couple of tools. Firstly, I plan my maneuvers using the Multiple Gravity Assist Trajectory Planner for KSP by KraftP, which I have linked down in the video details. The planner is a website that gets you to put in your desired planetary path through the Kerbal system and then calculates a potential launch window and route for your desired destination. KraftP's website provides you a list of instructions for the maneuvers you will need to make to follow the path it suggests, including the height of your slingshot, what direction to burn, and when to make deep space maneuvers. But as this isn't hooked up to a NASA supercomputer, each time you enter the details, you will get one of many possible different launch windows and travel plans for your journey. For our journey, this started with launching on Year 2, Day 211, before establishing an escape trajectory on Year 2, Day 212 at 2:46 and 46 seconds, with an ejection angle of minus 89.2 degrees using 973.6 meters second of thrust prograde. Yeah, now if this all sounds crazily complex and difficult, you are right. And if I were a betting man, I would not bet anything on a human controller getting this spot on. And being in exactly the right orbit to line this up is really difficult. And even still, getting the burn absolutely perfect is just as hard unless you're a computer or using Mecha Jeb. Alas, I am a fleshy human with aging limbs, and I suspect very few of you watching have already embraced our cyberpunk future. The good news is even if your burns aren't perfect, you can make adjustment burns to correct the shortfalls and overburns along the way, which you will see me do many times on this journey. To make this all work, I actually needed to add another tool to my kit, and that's a mod called Precise Node. This mod is a maneuver node planning editor, which is the little window you will see open many times for me to enter burn calculations into. Now this is not like Mecha Jeb where it does the burns for you. All it does is just let you directly input the time and delta V components for each maneuver you need to make manually, instead of playing with the toggles or the tiny in-game planner in the maneuver manager. But even this did not prepare me for the enormity of what I was undertaking. After leaving Kerbal, every single maneuver I planned required adjusting, and it took a lot of trial and error playing with the nodes to make this all work. Much of which I've edited out because my stars was it tedious. Now, while I've been explaining all that, we've done our Eve flyby, our second flyby of Kerbal, and are well on our way to our third flyby coming up. So how does this all compare to the path that JUICE is actually flying along? In the bottom right corner is an animation of JUICE's path to Jupiter, shown in pink. The blue orbit is Earth, the yellow is Venus, and the green is Jupiter. I don't know why Jupiter is green, but maybe whoever made the animation is a fan of Kerbal. You can see the orbit's apoapsis repeatedly growing in the same area of space as the gravity assists add more and more speed to the path, which is similar to what we've been doing on our journey too, albeit a little wonkier due to the different planetary behaviour. This extended path of travel essentially trades time for a much more fuel-efficient journey, and considering the Ariane 5 rocket typically puts satellites into a geostationary transfer orbit, any opportunity to save fuel on the way to Jupiter is going to be a big plus. So we've now finished all our gravity assist maneuvers to get to Jool, so on screen I'm planning how we're going to capture ourselves into the Jool system. And guess what? We're using another gravity assist. We're going to use Jool's innermost moon, Lathe, to redirect ourselves into an orbit around the gas giant, essentially doing the same maneuver we did to get ourselves out here, but in reverse. I also want to mention that as this mission took quite a long time in real-world hours to make, roughly about 7 hours total, plus an hour for the build, I've had to speed up the footage a lot to keep this within an acceptable time frame. Even cutting out a lot of the fiddling around with the maneuver planning, I realised this may be a bit too hectic of a pace to follow. However, I do promise the next time we go to Jool, the video will not be this crazy. Back during the build, I mentioned we were going to have some antenna issues, and the eagle-eyed among you may have noticed we had a period of no probe control as we started approaching Jool. Unfortunately, as this was a new sandbox game, I did not have a relay network our probe could use, so I had to boost the power of the DSN in the settings, otherwise all of this hard work would have gone to waste. But after all this swinging past planets, we've finally arrived at our destination, the Jool of the Kerbal system, Jool. But alas, our big gaseous friend is not our target this time around. Our mission is to explore its icy moons. Now, for this part of the mission, we're not going to follow what is planned for the real JUICE mission, as it's a long, intricate and sophisticated dance of gravity assists and adjustment burns that only the geniuses at ESA know the exact requirements of. If we were to replicate the mission exactly, we'd be using Tylo as our gravity assist partner to slow down, doing the crazy orbital dance you see in the bottom right corner before doing flybys of Val and Bob. But while the Jool system is modelled on Jupiter's system, the orbital inclinations are not the same. Bob's orbit is quite inclined compared to the plane of Tylo, Lathe and Val, by 15 degrees in fact. By comparison, Jupiter's Galilean moons travel on roughly the same orbital plane, with only 2 degrees of inclination across the entire group. So the manoeuvres and slingshots JUICE will employ for its observation duties simply won't work in Kerbal, and we'd run out of fuel without some inventive slingshot action. So instead, we're doing 2 flybys of Lathe, Val and Tylo before we settle into our final orbit around Jool's largest moon. As these 3 moons are in orbital resonance with each other, just like their Jovian counterparts, getting an intercept is mostly a matter of just playing around with your nodes until you find the right overlap, which was definitely a new experience. It's also a bit easier to transfer between these 3 moons because of their Laplace resonance, where for every orbit Tylo completes, Val completes 2 and Lathe completes 4. I did briefly look at trying to set up a Bob flyby, but decided against it based on the amount of fuel we had remaining and the need to enter Tylo orbit later. While I'm sure I could have made it work if we had have lined up the orbit right on the ascending or descending nodes, at this point in time it was late at night and I had work the next morning. So I swung us in for a flyby over Val's south pole and back up to Tylo to enter orbit. When JUICE gets to Jupiter in 2031, it's going to tour the moons of Europa, Ganymede and Callisto over 35 flybys, before it orbits Ganymede, the largest moon in our solar system. The mission is going to look for liquid water oceans on these moons, while also assessing the potential for them to support life, with the most detailed survey being conducted on Ganymede over a year while it's in orbit, before JUICE is eventually deorbited around the end of 2035. All up, this mission took way longer than I thought it would, and with it being my first time heading into the outer Kerbal system, it was definitely exciting to do something new in the game after all this time. Admittedly, that's more on me. However, I definitely took some liberties with this mission, including cheekily overusing the upper stage for much of our journey. But why waste all that lovely Delta V if it means the mission succeeds and we get to enjoy the ride? I am going to have to install a time warp mod so I can go higher than the current maximum warp setting though, as it was excruciating how long it took on the last leg to get into Jool orbit. Next time we head to Jool though, I am looking forward to investigating the system properly, with some landings of course and some cloud surfing on Jool while I'm at it, though that might be a little bit later on down the road. But for now, that's where we are going to wrap up this video. Thank you so much for watching. Apologies for the gaps in production over these past few months. Life does have a habit of getting in the way sometimes, and with my new house having been under construction for almost 2 years now, you can probably imagine how keen I am to get everything ready so we can move in as soon as possible. Next video, we'll be returning to the Artemis program, both to expand the Lunar Gateway and to get Artemis 4 down to the Moon's surface. So until then, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next pass.